All right, let's jump right into this explainer and uncover the truth behind a viral gardening trick. We're going to start with a little mystery that unfolded on the island of Maui. Picture this, a grove of papaya trees that had just given up. The leaves were yellowing, getting super thin, and the fruit? It had stopped coming completely. The culprit was actually hiding down in the soil. These microscopic worms, called rhiniform nematodes, were actively feeding on the roots, literally draining the life out of the trees from below. By every conventional measure, that papaya grove was completely 100% finished.
Now, the grower could have easily reached for some harsh chemical fumigant to clear out the soil. But instead, a scientist named Susan Schenck, who was working at the Hawaii Agriculture Research Center at the time, tried something that honestly sounds almost too plain to take seriously. She decided to run a thin stream of watered-down molasses straight through the irrigation lines. Yeah, literally the exact same dark, sticky syrup sitting in your baking cabinet right now. She used a simple 1:20 ratio of molasses to water, applying it just once a week. And over the following weeks, something absolutely incredible happened. The grove came back. It pushed out new leaves, fresh growth, and eventually fruit on trees that had already been completely written off as dead.
So, how did baking syrup save a dying grove? You'll hear plenty of folks online tell this exact story and just confidently call it magic. But you know us, we're going to do something a bit different here. We are going to uncover the biological chain reaction that this everyday syrup actually triggered. We're moving past the whole internet magic trick thing and getting into the actual, incredibly useful science of the soil. Because, let's be real, understanding what truly happened underground is way more valuable to you than some fairy tale.
Okay, part 1, the Rhizosphere reveal. The absolutely crucial point we need to hit right away is that almost everyone gets this completely backwards. The very first thing you need to understand is that the molasses did not feed those papaya trees. Why? Because molasses is not plant food. It just never was. To figure out what actually saved the grove, we have to look at what was quietly running the show the entire time. The big internet myth assumes that you pour molasses to feed the plant directly, kind of like a standard mineral fertilizer. But the scientific reality is totally different. Molasses actually feeds an invisible workforce. Think about this. If you scoop up a handful of healthy garden soil, there are literally more living creatures in that single handful than there are human beings on the entire planet. We're talking billions of bacteria, fungi, and tiny protozoa packed into those little crumbs of dirt clinging to the roots. That is who the molasses is actually feeding. What's truly fascinating here is that plants aren't just passively sipping nutrients from this zone. They're actively feeding it. You know, for a long time, we pictured soil as just a warehouse. You put fertilizer in, the plant takes nutrients out. But back in 1904, a German scientist named Lorenz Hiltner noticed that the soil pressed right up against a living root was absolutely crowded with microscopic life, like way more than soil just an inch away. He called this bustling zone the rhizosphere. And here is the real paradigm shift. Up in their leaves, plants turn sunlight and air into sugar. Naturally, you'd think they'd keep it all to grow taller, right? Well, they don't. Careful studies from places like the University of Bonn reveal that a grown plant intentionally leaks up to 40% of its hard-earned carbon sugars directly into the ground. Let that sink in. Nearly half of everything the plant earns in a given day is sent right underground. Why on earth would they do that? Because those leaked sugars are basically wages. The plant is literally hiring microbes. Using hospital-grade imaging, researchers have actually watched plants steer sugar to exact spots on their roots, basically hiring workers right where they need them most. In return for this sugar payday, the microbes pry nutrients loose from soil particles, they build soil structures so the roots can breathe, and crucially, they crowd out diseases. Moving on to part 2, the science of blackstrap. This brings us directly to why this baking syrup actually works. When you strip molasses down to its basics, it's essentially just a dark, mineral-rich sugar. So when you pour it into your garden, you're doing by hand the exact same thing your plants have been doing through their roots since the beginning of time. You're simply paying this underground workforce. It's not some hidden cure or a locked-up corporate secret. It's just sugar offered to the living things doing the actual heavy lifting. But you might be wondering, why blackstrap specifically? Well, the number 3 is key here. When a sugar mill processes sugarcane, it boils the juice to spin out the sugar crystals. That first boil, that gives you light pancake syrup. The second gives you darker molasses. But it's the third and final boiling that leaves behind the blackstrap. It's this thick, almost bitter syrup right at the bottom of the kettle. Because sugarcane is essentially a giant grass that draws minerals up from deep underground, by the time you reach that third boiling, the regular table sugar is vastly reduced and all those deep earth minerals are highly concentrated. If we look at the exact concentrations, a single tablespoon of blackstrap holds roughly 300 milligrams of potassium, 40 of calcium, and about 50 of magnesium. But let me be perfectly straight with you here. While it definitely contains these minerals, once it's diluted across a whole gallon of water and spread out over a dozen plants, it simply isn't enough to act as a direct mineral fertilizer. If you're pouring this stuff hoping to hit some potassium quota for your tomatoes, you are going to be severely disappointed. And honestly, that brilliantly illustrates its true scientific value. It isn't a mineral feed at all. It's what scientists call a labile carbon source. That's basically just a fancy scientific term for a fast, easy sugar food that soil microbes can gulp down immediately with zero waiting. Researchers like Jason Hong and Aaron Roscoff at the USDA in Florida, along with teams over at Clemson University, rely heavily on this. They use molasses as the fuel for a process called anaerobic soil disinfestation. Basically, they work the molasses into the soil, cover it up, and let the microbes feast so incredibly hard that they burn off all the oxygen. This natural microbial frenzy completely clears out weeds, soil diseases, and those pesky nematodes without using a single drop of harsh chemicals. It's a carbon source, guys, not a fertilizer. All right, part 3, the honest catch. Here is the honest truth that most of those viral internet videos will just quietly skip right over, and it's absolutely vital for understanding when this whole trick fails. Molasses does not always work. A really careful study out of Ursinus College proved that everyday amounts of molasses applied to bare, lifeless dirt do absolutely nothing to meaningfully lift microbial activity or release nutrients, compared to just doing nothing at all. Bottom line, if your dirt is dead, the molasses is useless. To really wrap our heads around this, think about lighting a wood stove. Molasses is the kindling. It is not the fire. If you throw dry kindling into a stove with absolutely no logs beneath it, what happens? It flares up bright, looks great for a second, and then dies in a minute, leaving the room totally cold. You absolutely must have logs already in your soil, and by logs I mean organic matter, like compost, decaying leaves, or old roots, to actually sustain that fire over time. Let's look at the actual timeline if you pour this kindling onto dead dirt. Within hours, the few microbes that are hanging around wake up, they gorge themselves, and their numbers double. Massive boom. But within a few days, that fast, easy sugar just runs out. And because there's no underlying organic matter, no logs to fall back on, the entire population completely crashes, and the microbes die off within a week or two. You literally end up exactly where you started. Boom and bust. Okay, part 4, the $1 soil recipe. Now, when you pour that kindling onto living soil that is already packed with organic matter, the dynamic entirely shifts. Researchers found that a single feeding of this fast carbon wakes the whole community up, and then that underlying organic matter keeps the microbial activity humming along beautifully for 4 to 5 weeks. So let's walk through the exact $1 recipe to do this right. The real skill here lives in the small details. Step 1, if you're using city water, remember it contains chlorine, which is literally designed to kill microbes, the exact opposite of what we want. So fill a watering can and just sit it out uncovered overnight so that chlorine can evaporate. Step 2, dissolve 1 tablespoon of grocery store blackstrap in a little bit of warm water first. If you don't do this, that thick syrup just won't mix properly. Step 3, top off the gallon with cool water. And step 4, this is important, pour it strictly on the root zone. Do not spray this stuff on the leaves. Spraying sugar water on foliage is just asking for ants and can actually grow a sticky black sooty mold. Here are a few pro tips to guarantee success. First, ensure your logs are in place by laying down about 1 inch of compost over your soil first, especially if it happens to be bare. Apply this mixture once every 2 to 3 weeks maximum. Any more than that, and you risk throwing the soil into that boom and crash cycle we talked about. Always water it in during the morning or in the cool evening, never in the midday heat. And hey, for those of you who like to tinker, you can optionally add a teaspoon of ordinary baker's yeast to the gallon. It brings in new microbes and produces small amounts of natural plant growth compounds. Just make sure you use that batch within a day, or the microbes are going to throw a massive party and eat all the sugar right there in your watering can. Now, let's ground our expectations for a second. What you should realistically expect over the following weeks is slightly darker soil, you'll see earthworms moving up closer to the surface to join the party, and you'll get steady green growth. Do not expect the internet fairy tale of your tomato plants miraculously tripling in size in 7 days.
The microscopic life inside your soil will absolutely multiply rapidly, yes, but the actual plant growth, that's going to be steady and patient. To wrap up this explainer, consider this pretty massive economic irony. If this method is so heavily validated by university scientists, why isn't it sold in some fancy expensive bag at your local garden center? Well, it's because molasses is unpatentable leftover that sells for just a couple of bucks. No company can patent it or build a massive business around reselling it to you, so no one is going to pay to advertise it. And that leaves us with a quiet but incredibly powerful realization. Why try so hard to force-feed the plant when the absolute best tool in your garden is simply working alongside the hidden living workforce already beneath your feet?